There are people who are loved in the way that weather is loved, noticed when it is pleasant, complained about when it is not, and never once asked how it works. You do not resent being loved this way for a long time because you are busy, and because love in any form is still love, and because the work itself has its own satisfaction that does not require an audience. But there comes a moment, and it arrives always in the middle of something ordinary, in the middle of someone else's sentence, when you understand that the weather does not maintain itself, that someone has been maintaining it, that someone is you, and that the room you are sitting in does not know this and is not going to find out on its own. My name is Nadine. I am 32 years old. I am a grants administrator living in Indianapolis, Indiana, in an apartment on the north side of the city with 2 east-facing windows that let in the morning light in a way I have not been able to find in any other apartment I have looked at, and I have lived here for 3 years, and it is mine in every way that a place can be yours, chosen, arranged, paid for, known. My parents live in Cincinnati. The drive is 2 hours on a good day, 2.5 when there is construction on I-74, which there has been intermittently for the last 18 months. I have made that drive more times than I have counted. I stopped counting when I understood that counting was a way of keeping score, and I did not want to be the kind of person who kept score, and so I stopped. What I did not stop was the driving, or the paying, or the renewing, or the calling. Those things I continued because they needed doing, and I was the one who knew how to do them, and knowing how to do something and watching it go undone are, for a certain kind of person, not compatible states. I want to tell you what I was doing for 6 years. Not in the abstract. In the specific. I paid the utility bills. This sounds simple, and it is not simple. When I say I paid the utility bills, I mean I managed the accounts, the electric, the gas, the water, the internet across 6 years, which means I updated payment methods when my parents changed banks, which they did twice. I set up autopay where it was available and managed the monthly review where it was not. I caught the water department error in March of 2022, a billing dispute that had been escalating for 3 months without my parents noticing, because the notices had been going to an old email address my mother had stopped checking, and the account had been flagged for disconnection. I found this out on a Tuesday morning when I was reviewing the account as part of my standard monthly check. I called the water department at 9:14 a.m. I was on hold for 22 minutes. I spoke with a supervisor for 47 minutes. I had the account restored and the erroneous charges reversed by 11:43 a.m. My parents did not know this had happened until I told them 2 weeks later, and by then it was resolved, and they received the information the way you receive news of a problem that no longer exists, with mild relief and no particular weight. I managed the health insurance renewals. Every year, during open enrollment in November, I researched my parents' plan options, compared them against their current usage and medications, selected the optimal plan, completed the enrollment paperwork, and confirmed the transition. I did this every year, for 6 years. The first year I did it because my mother called me in a panic in late October saying she had received an enrollment notice and did not understand it and did not know what to do. I walked her through it on the phone for an hour and a half. The second year she did not call because she knew I would handle it. She was right. I handled it. I handled it the third year, and the fourth, and the fifth, and the sixth without being asked, because not being asked had become the structure of the arrangement, and the arrangement had become invisible, and invisible arrangements are the ones that continue indefinitely because no one thinks to examine whether they should. I managed the property tax filing. Every year, I researched applicable exemptions. My parents qualified for a homestead exemption they had not been claiming for the first 3 years I was involved, and when I found this I filed the retroactive paperwork and recovered the overpayment for the prior 2 years in which it had applied. My father mentioned this once, briefly, in a phone call. Nadine sorted something out with the taxes, and moved on. That was the extent of its acknowledgement. I tracked and renewed the home warranty. This is a small thing compared to the others, but I include it because it is precisely the kind of small, ongoing, invisible administrative task that reveals what it actually means to manage a household from 2 hours away. The warranty renewed every 14 months on a non-standard cycle, which meant it fell at a different point in the calendar each year and was easy to miss. I missed it once in 6 years, in 2021, when I was managing several other things at the same time, and the notification went to a spam folder, and the gap lasted 11 days before I caught it and reinstated the coverage. I noted it in my calendar, and did not miss it again. And for the last year and a half of that 6, the year and a half that began when my grandmother, my mother's mother, received her diagnosis and ended when she died in the January of this year, I managed all of the above while my mother was managing her grief, which is its own kind of full-time work and which I understood, and for which I did not reduce my own work by one phone call or one renewal or one reviewed account statement. I simply continued, because the bills do not grieve. The renewal notices do not pause. The water department does not take a year and a half off. And I was the one who knew this. I want to stop here and ask you something before I tell you what happened at the memorial lunch. Tell me where you are. Tell me what city you are in, what the light looks like there right now, what time of day it is where you are sitting. I ask because what I am about to tell you is easier to say when I know you are somewhere real, somewhere that belongs to you. And because I think you may already know something about this kind of list. I think you may be carrying one of your own, and I think you may have been carrying it for a while, and I think you may not have told anyone its full weight. The memorial lunch was on a Saturday in March. My grandmother had died in January, and my mother had been planning the gathering for 6 weeks, a lunch at the family home in Cincinnati, family and close friends, the people who had known my grandmother well enough to be in the room where she was remembered. There were 23 people. I know this because I counted when I arrived at 11:30 a.m., The way I count things, the way counting is how I locate myself in a room. I had driven down that morning. I left Indianapolis at 8:47 a.m. and arrived at 10:53, earlier than I had said I would, because I wanted to help my mother with the setup, which I did. I arranged the food on the dining table, found the serving utensils in the cabinet where they had been reorganized at some point in the last year, helped carry chairs from the garage to fill the seating gap in the living room. My mother was already in the particular compressed mode she enters when she is managing something large and emotional and practical at the same time, moving through the house with purpose, speaking in short sentences, not pausing long enough to feel the grief directly. I recognized this. I did not interrupt it. I simply moved with her and did the things that needed doing. The lunch itself was warm and dense in the way that memorial gatherings are. Food consumed in the particular attentive way that people eat when eating is also a way of being present, voices low and then occasionally not low, the specific texture of a room full of people who are holding their sadness in different shapes. My grandmother's friend sat in the corner near the window. My mother's brother and his wife were there. My Aunt Vivian, my mother's younger sister, who lives in Columbus and who called my grandmother every Sunday for the last 4 years of her life, which was real and loving and good, was seated near the center of the room and had been near my mother's side for most of the morning. At 1 p.m. my mother stood. She had a glass in her hand. She did not tap it. She simply rose and the room quieted for her the way rooms quiet for certain people, not because they demand it, but because their rising carries a quality of intention that the people around them recognize. She said she wanted to take a moment before people began to leave. She said she wanted to name the people who had been a blessing to her and to her mother in the last year and a half, the people who had made the hardest period of her life something she had been able to carry. I put my fork down, not because I was preparing to do anything. I put it down the way you put something down when your body understands that you should be empty-handed for what is about to happen. She named Aunt Vivian first. She said Vivian had called their mother every Sunday without fail for 4 years, and that those calls had been a thread of constancy through the illness, and that she did not know how her mother would have moved through the final months without the sound of Vivian's voice on Sunday evenings. Vivian pressed her lips together and nodded and touched her own glass. She named my cousin Petra, who lived in Cincinnati and had driven my grandmother to 3 of her medical appointments in the fall when my mother's car was in the shop and my mother's schedule was impossible. She said Petra had shown up without being asked and had sat in the waiting rooms and had brought food afterward, and that this was the kind of showing up that could not be replaced or replicated. She named Grace, a family friend who had known my grandmother for 40 years and who had sat with her on Thursday afternoons in the last 6 months, simply sat with her, conversation or no conversation, for as long as my grandmother wanted company. She said Grace was the definition of a blessing, and she thanked her. Then she raised her glass. She said she was grateful to everyone in the room. She sat down. I was sitting 8 feet from where she was standing. I want to be precise about what happened in the moment the glass went up and came back down, because precision is the only thing I have to offer in place of drama, and there was no drama, which is part of what makes it so difficult to describe. What happened was this. A sentence ended, and the room exhaled, and the space where I might have been named continued to exist as a space, and the room did not notice it, and I sat inside it alone. She had not named me because she had not thought to name me. I am certain of this. I am not certain it is better than the alternative. Across the table, my mother's cousin Roberta, a woman in her late 60s who has a quality of stillness I have always associated with people who have learned to pay attention rather than speak, was looking at me. Not with pity. Not with the performance of sympathy. With the plain, direct quality of attention that means, I saw what just happened. I know what you were not named for. You are not imagining the weight of the thing that was not said. I held her eyes for 2 seconds. Then I looked at the table. I finished what was on my plate. I waited for the room to settle back into its own rhythm, for the conversations to re-establish themselves, for the attention to move away from my mother's glass and toward the particular logistics of departure that began to stir in a room an hour after lunch. I waited until I was not the only person shifting in my seat. Then I pushed my chair back from the table at 1:47 p.m. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. I went to the kitchen where my mother was consolidating the serving dishes, and I told her the food had been beautiful and the gathering had done justice to grandmother, and I needed to start the drive back before the traffic thickened. She turned from the counter and looked at me. There was something in her face, not quite recognition, not quite apology, something in the neighborhood of both that she did not have the words for in that moment or did not reach for. She kissed my cheek. She told me to drive safely. I was in my car at 1:53 p.m., 22 minutes after she sat down. I drove north on I-74 with the radio off. The temperature was 41 degrees. The sky was the color of a winter that has not yet decided to become spring. Pale gray, flat, neither threatening nor promising anything. I drove in it the way you drive when you have somewhere to arrive and no particular investment in the arriving, because the arriving will be the same apartment it always is, the same east-facing windows, the same stillness, and the stillness is what you are driving toward, but you are not rushing toward it because you are not sure yet whether you want to arrive or whether you want to stay in the motion. I have been a grants administrator for 7 years. My job, in its simplest form, is to understand systems, funding systems, institutional systems, compliance requirements, reporting structures, and to navigate them with enough precision that the organizations I support can do their actual work without being derailed by the administrative infrastructure that surrounds it. I am good at this. I am good at it because I have a tolerance for complexity that other people find exhausting, and because I can hold a large number of moving parts in my attention simultaneously without losing track of any of them, and because I do not find it demoralizing when the work is invisible. When the work is going well, nothing dramatic happens. The grants arrive. The reports file. The deadlines pass without incident. The organization continues. Nobody names this. Nobody stands up and says, the reason this institution is still functioning is that someone is managing its administrative life with extraordinary care. They simply continue functioning, and the functioning seems self-evident, and the person making it self-evident is, in that way, invisible. I had understood this about my professional life for a long time. I had not, until I-74 in March, understood that I had built the exact same structure inside my family. Around the 40-minute mark, somewhere past the first few exits north of Cincinnati, I said something to myself in the car that I had been not saying for 6 years. I said it quietly, out loud, to nobody, to the windshield, to the flat, pale sky outside it. I said, I have been managing the infrastructure of their lives for 6 years, and it has been as invisible to them as infrastructure always is, and that is not an accident or an oversight, that is the nature of the thing I built. I built it to be invisible. I built it to run without interruption. I built it so that they would never have to think about it. And the cost of building something to be invisible is that it is invisible. That is not their failure of attention. That is the logical consequence of the thing I made. I sat with that for a long time. I let it be true. The rest of the drive I spent with the particular quality of quiet that is available when you have finally said the true thing to yourself and your body is adjusting to the weight of it being said. Not released, said. There is a difference. The weight does not disappear when you name it. It simply becomes the right shape, finally. It fits into the space it was always occupying. And fitting properly, even into a difficult space, is a different sensation than being jammed wrongly into one. I arrived in Indianapolis at 4:38 p.m. I parked. I went upstairs. I made tea. I sat at my table by the east-facing windows and watched the light change from afternoon to early evening, which in March in Indianapolis happens around 7 o'clock and involves a specific quality of orange on the buildings across the street that I have never seen duplicated anywhere else. I watched it until it was gone. I did not call anyone. I did not reply to the 3 messages on my phone. I simply sat in my own apartment in my own chair with my own tea and let the evening arrive around me, and understood that I was in the right place. April came. The first week, the second. In the third week of April, a renewal notice for my parents' home warranty arrived, the 14-month cycle notice I had been tracking and managing since 2019. It arrived to my email because I was the account contact, which I had been since I set up the account, because I had set it up, because I had been the one who knew it needed to exist. I looked at it for a long time. I did not open it. I moved it to a folder I labeled, without particular intention, not mine. My mother called on a Thursday evening at 6:17 p.m. I answered. She asked if I had seen anything about the home warranty. The company had apparently also sent a notice directly to the house, a paper notice, which my father had found on the kitchen counter and flagged to her. I told her I had seen a notice. I told her I was no longer managing the account. There was a pause. She asked what she should do. I told her the company's name was on the notice and the phone number would be on the company's website. I told her it was a straightforward renewal. I wished her a good evening. She called again the following Tuesday. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail said the renewal had a deadline at the end of the month, and she wasn't sure of the coverage terms, and could I just take a quick look? I listened to the message twice. I did not call back. The home warranty lapsed at the end of April. I know this because my father mentioned it in a call in May, a call about something else, my cousin's graduation, and he added at the end, almost as an aside, that the home warranty had apparently expired and he wasn't sure how to reinstate it. He said it in the tone of someone reporting a mild administrative inconvenience that he expected someone else to resolve. I told him the company's name and suggested he call them directly. He said he would look into it. In October, open enrollment opened for my parents' health insurance. The deadline was the 15th of November. I had managed this enrollment every year since 2018. I did not begin the research process in October. I did not open the enrollment portal. I did not compare the plan options. I made a note in my own calendar that said open enrollment, not mine to manage, and I moved to the next item. My father called on the 9th of November at 8:22 p.m. He said he had received an enrollment notice and he and my mother weren't sure what to do with it. They had always just had it sorted out by the deadline, and he wasn't sure who sorted it out, but it seemed like something needed doing. He asked if I knew anything about it. I told him I had managed their enrollment every year since 2018. I told him I was not managing it this year. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he didn't realize I had been doing that. He said he supposed he had thought it just got handled. I said yes. I told him the deadline was the 15th and the portal login was in the email account associated with the insurance, and that if he called the company they could walk him through the options. He said he would figure it out. I sat with the phone after he hung up and held the phrase he had used. It just got handled. 6 years. 6 open enrollments. 6 property tax filings. 37 utility account management cycles. 1 water department crisis resolved in a single morning. The home warranty, 14 months at a time. It just got handled. As if handling were a weather event. As if someone had not been specifically and consistently, and with ongoing attention, doing the handling. In November, I called cousin Roberta. She had been in my mind since March. The quality of attention she had given me across the memorial lunch table, the plainness of it, the way she had not performed her seeing but had simply seen. I called her because I wanted to talk to someone who had actually been in the room. We spoke for an hour and 17 minutes. She told me she had been watching my mother for the entirety of the lunch, and she had noticed when my mother stood that she was going to speak, and she had noticed when my mother sat down that something had been left undone. She said she had thought about calling me since March. She said she had not because she was not sure it was her place. I told her I was glad she had picked up. She told me something about my mother that I had known in parts but had not assembled into its full shape. She said my mother was a woman who noticed the emotional texture of her life with great precision, who had been kind to her as a feeling, who had shown up as a person in the room. She said my mother was not, and had never been, a woman who noticed the administrative texture of her life. She said this was not a flaw she had chosen. It was simply a way of moving through the world that she had never had to revise, because there had always been someone revising the world for her. First her own mother, then my father in some things, then me, in the things I had quietly taken over without anyone marking the transition. She said, "Your mother did not name you because she genuinely did not connect what she was thanking people for, presence, emotional warmth, constancy of feeling, with what you have been providing, which is a different category of care entirely. She does not have a word for what you do.
She does not know it has a shape."
I do not think this makes her ungrateful. I think it makes her unaware. And I do not know that she will become aware on her own. I thanked Roberta. I told her that what she had said was the most useful thing anyone had said to me in the 8 months since March. She laughed briefly and said she hoped that was a low bar and not a high one. After I hung up, I sat for a while in my chair and thought about what it meant to do a category of care for which no one has a word. I thought about it the way I think about grant structures, looking for the architecture, trying to understand what was load-bearing and what was decorative, trying to see the thing from the outside. And I understood, sitting there, that the problem was not that my mother was ungrateful. The problem was that she did not know the category existed. And she did not know the category existed because I had made it as easy to not know as possible. Every time I had resolved something before it became visible, I had also resolved the opportunity for it to be seen. I had been, in the truest sense, too good at being invisible. That was a strange thing to understand about myself. Strange, and also, sitting in that chair, something that had the quality of settling, of a piece of information finally fitting into the space that had been waiting for it. I called my mother in January, 13 months after the memorial lunch, 10 months after I had stopped managing the accounts. A Tuesday evening at 7:09 p.m. I had been thinking about making the call since Roberta and I had spoken in November, had been drafting it in the way you draft something important, not writing it down but carrying it, letting it find its shape, letting the unnecessary words fall away until only the necessary ones were left. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was warm and slightly surprised in the way it is when I call without a specific stated reason, because my calls in recent years had usually had a specific stated reason. I told her I had something to say, and I was going to say it once. I said that at grandmother's memorial lunch she had stood and named every person who had been a blessing to her and to grandmother through the illness and the dying and the year and a half that had led to it. I said she had named Vivian and Petra and Grace. I said I had been sitting 8 feet from where she was standing. I told her that for the 6 years prior to that afternoon I had been managing the practical infrastructure of her and my father's life, and I named it, specifically the way I had named it to myself on I-74 in March, the bills, the renewals, the health insurance enrollment every November since 2018, the property tax filings, the water department crisis in March of 2022, the home warranty on its 14-month cycle. I told her that the reason none of those things had ever become problems was that I had been ensuring they did not become problems. I told her that I had stopped doing that in March, and that I was not going to resume. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she didn't know. She said she genuinely had not known I had been doing all of that. She said she thought things had always just. She paused. She did not finish the sentence. I think she heard in the pause what finishing it would sound like.
She said she was sorry.
She said it simply, without elaboration, which was the right way to say it. I told her I appreciated that. I told her I was not calling because I needed her to apologize or to understand everything I had said in the next 10 minutes. I had called because I needed to say the true thing once, to the person it was true about, and I had said it.
I hoped she was well.
I would talk to her soon. I hung up at 7:19 p.m. I sat at my table afterward. Through the east-facing windows the January night was already full dark, and the buildings across the street showed their lit windows in the particular pattern they make on a Tuesday in winter. A few lit, most dark, the occasional moving shadow behind a curtain. I looked at the pattern for a while. I did not analyze it. I simply let it be the thing it was, which was the view from my own window, in my own apartment, in a city I had chosen, on an evening that was entirely mine to spend as I chose. Something that had been occupying a large and load-bearing position in my interior life for a very long time had been set down. Not resolved. Not healed.
Set down.
There is a category of relief that is not happiness, that is quieter than happiness, less concerned with being noticed, and that is what I felt, or rather what I did not feel, which was the weight of the thing I had been carrying. Its absence had a texture.
I want to be accurate about that.
The absence of a carried weight has a texture that is not lightness. It is more like the specific quality of a room after a piece of furniture has been moved. The room is not transformed, but you notice the space. Labor is not the same thing as love. Being the one who keeps things running is not the same thing as being seen. Doing invisible work with care does not mean you have agreed to do it invisibly forever. On a Tuesday evening in February, I walked to my car after work, and the air had the smell of rain on warm pavement, that specific combination that happens when the temperature crosses a threshold and the first rain of the year hits ground that has been cold for months and releases something that has been held in the concrete since autumn. I stopped walking. I stood on the pavement outside my building for 11 seconds. I counted, and I let it be exactly what it was, which was rain on warm pavement in Indianapolis on a Tuesday in February, which was a specific and unrepeatable thing that belonged to no one and was available to anyone who stopped long enough to be in it. I stood in it. I breathed it in. I did not go anywhere for 11 seconds. That was enough. That was, in the precise and unhurried and complete way that something can be enough, more than enough. If you have been managing something for years, not the visible things, not the things that get named at a lunch or a dinner or a gathering where people stand and say who's been a blessing, but the invisible things, the administrative architecture, the accounts and the renewals, and the calls that resolve the crises before they become visible, I want to ask you something gently. Not whether you should have stopped sooner, or whether the people you were managing it for deserved the care you brought to it. Those questions do not have answers that will make you feel better. I want to ask something smaller, something more specific. Is there a category of what you do, a real, specific, innumerable category for which no one in your life has a word? Not because they are cruel, not because they are ungrateful, but because you made it so easy to not know that they never had to learn the word for it? And if that category exists, what would it mean to name it once out loud, to yourself first, in the plainest possible language? Not for them. Not so that they can thank you, but because you have been carrying something without a name for a very long time, and named things are easier to set down than unnamed ones, and you have, I think, been carrying this one long enough.